I'm Neil Doherty with North Country Whitetails, and welcome to DSI. You know, for years you've been reading about big bucks and some of the stories behind how they're harvested, but you never really got a full picture. In DSI, we're going to break it down in great detail and really give you the behind-the-scenes talk and understanding why deer do what they do. We're going to merge the deer stories with the science behind how the deer move, the food sources in the area, get up above and study aerial photography and really teach you how to use those techniques when it comes to your hunts this fall. This is the story of Evander and Tracy's first bow buck. Really, the story sets itself up with a husband and wife team that are managing this 1,200-acre farm. Their overall goal is to try to get bucks to fully mature before they engage them for harvest. And Tracy was lucky enough to do that with Evander. Now, Evander had showed up several years ago. Now, they had different pictures of him. He always had been on this eastern section of the farm, in and around this destination food plot, which had a strip of corn, it had a strip of soybeans, brassica, and then a large 1.5-acre area of clover that was also planted, as well as a smaller hunting food plot that was planted in Whitetail Institute wintergreens, which is a mixture of brassica located at the south end of this overall food complex. Evander showed up as a 4-year-old, and they had a few pictures of him. He was really kind of a nondescript buck, other than that he was more or less a loner. They would get pictures of him during the pre-rut some. They would get some post-rut pictures of him. During the rut, he would bop around with does, but really not any one behavior that was dominating versus another behavior. As he grew older, his behaviors changed, and by the time he was 6 years old, he was the dominant buck in the area and showed a tremendous amount of attitude during the rut, but still remained a loner. During the early season, they photographed him several times coming out of this real thick bedding sanctuary, easing up into the food plots during shooting hours. The problem is, it was too early in the season hadn't opened yet. By the time the season opened, the buck had switched his ways and had become nocturnal, and they had to wait for the rut before the buck would start to move around during daylight hours when they had a chance to hunt them. Now the husband and wife team thing kicks in because the husband was sitting up in the morning, glassing and observing this feeding area where he watched Evander at first light with several other does and a couple smaller bucks off the edge of the destination field. The bucks were aggressively pursuing the does, and Evander was kind of trailing along behind the whole area of deer as they drifted back into the bedding sanctuary located back in this thicket. Again, this thicket had been cut very heavily in past timbering, opening up the tree canopy and allowing lots of brambles and briars to grow in this section. They didn't really have a lot of hunting stands located down in the area because it was problematic to hunt this side of the farm with the prevailing westerly winds. Every time you hunted this section of the farm, it was really easy for the deer to pick up downwind of any stand location the scent of the hunter drifting to them. So it was better off just to leave the area undisturbed and try to pick off the deer as they headed up to the food sources. So there's only 3 main hunting locations, one located right here off the edge of the food plot, one tucked back in the brush here, and one location tucked back on the far north end of the food complex to try to catch a deer coming out of the sanctuary if there happened to be a south wind. Now, on this particular day, Evander moved through. It was a southerly wind, and he was absolutely on fire. As these 3 smaller bucks chased the does around, he tore up every autumn olive and every brush, everything he came to, he just ripped it to shreds as he drifted back through this food plot and back into the timber about 20 minutes after first light. Now, what they expected to happen was the buck went down and he laid up back in a thick sanctuary, and the idea being with a southern wind that day, they could slip along and intercept his path as he's heading back to the food plots, maybe following those does in hopes that the does were in estrus, following the does back to the food plots. So for a loner buck, he was associating a little bit with deer, showing a tremendous amount of aggression and frustration that particular day, and thought just might be what's needed to catch him as he drifted back to the field. Now, as a husband and a wife team, they were able to get Tracy out of work early, and they moved along on the north end of this feeding complex, and they decided to double team the stand sit that day. They moved on the eastern side of the corn complex, and one of the hunters, the husband, actually went back into a stand location that was tucked back into the corn. Now it's simply a folding chair tucked in the middle of the corn to try to catch the deer as they move in. So it's a real low-tech option here for hunting the deer on the edge of the cornfield. Tracy moved along directly with her, basically her nose in the wind, and moved right back into the timber to the stand location right here. In addition to stand location, there's some other things here that are set up to help funnel the deer past the stand as they're heading towards those big fields. A small half-acre food plot is located out in the edge of the field, and right off the edge of that half-acre food plot is a section, a 100-yard section of snow fence that's been put in the woods here during the summer months, and that actually diverts the deer past the stand location here into this small field, or forces them out and around and brings them right past the timber stand as they're heading up into the woods. Now, Tracy's choice was critical this day in how she walked into the field. And she said from that stand location her scent would drift in a straight north direction, so she wanted to walk where her scent would be to try to contaminate the least amount of area. If she walked out and around and came into the typical approach into that stand, her scent would go this way, plus she had boot tracks out here. She's just contaminating too much of an area on the way into the stand. As the evening advanced, several smaller bucks, several does, passed along within easy shooting distance as they drifted out towards the field complex where her husband was. And just as the last of the legal shooting hours were passing through, she heard some crunching and looked off her back shoulder, and coming out of the grass field was Evander. Now he came from a direction they didn't expect. They thought he would be coming out of the bedding area, drifting right up through with the wind at his back. He's actually moving across. And it just happened, this is a little bit of a lucky scenario, it just happened to be that the wind started to die at that point in time, and the thermals started to kick in, which dragged the scent down this ridge. So as he moved into the timber, her scent started to drift down the ridge and cut off his ability to smell her on the stand. The buck moved through, he worked a licking branch at 25 yards, moved back into a primary scrape, and offered her a shot at 8 yards. Now, for a first bow kill, 8 yards is a great shot. That's exactly where you want to be. She made a perfect shot. The buck ran off about 40 yards and piled up. So it was a tremendous, tremendous deer for a first bow kill, as well as a great shot to see the deer go down. Evander was really a unique type of buck. He was a loner. He was hyper-aggressive during the rut, and other than that, he really wasn't killable. And simply being patient, laying off the area, keeping the pressure down, and then when he moved into what's perceived to be a vulnerable location based on that day's wind, and then two hunters in this case attacking the buck, moving into position, was exactly what was needed to be successful that day.